Hey everybody, welcome to the Monday morning phone call. Hope you had a good weekend. If you have any questions, concerns, things going well, things going poorly, let us know. Now's the time to tell us that. Just type it in the chat box. Otherwise, Jeff has a topic we want to cover today so that you are addressing these things with your clients and understand backwards and forwards what we're talking about when we meet with them. So, Jeff, if you could take over for me.
Sure. Well, I get a lot of calls, and when I'm working on the 21-point checklist with a lot of you, a lot of the investments that we see are variable annuities. And when we look at these variable annuities, oftentimes people will have questions about the riders or the living benefits that they see, the income riders that are attached to these. So what I thought we would do today is kind of zero in on the living benefits of a variable annuity, because quite frankly, that's the reason that sales of variable annuities have taken off in the last several years. That's the whole reason that people are buying them, because they're really interested and kind of locked into these living benefits. And any discussion about a variable annuity will inevitably come up in the disclosure meeting, that 21-point checklist meeting. And so we might talk about them in the fees section, but I don't want to get too much into the discussion of how we do that, but I do want to kind of cover it briefly and maybe look a little bit deeper into those living benefits. And anytime I start a discussion about a variable annuity, you'll know that we always begin by talking about the great things about that choice. And so when we talk about the great things about a variable annuity, the first thing that we point out is that there are a lot of choices. That when they opened the account, they didn't just have one thing to pick from, they had a whole menu of options that they could select from. So a variable annuity gives you a lot of choice. And you also have a lot of flexibility. You can change those choices or those sub-accounts anytime you want. So, you know, if the market's trending one way and we see that it's maybe shifting and doing another thing, we have the ability to change our choices. And they don't typically charge you for that. So not only do you have a lot of choice, but you have a lot of flexibility. And then there's the obvious tax deferral. You don't have to pay any tax on the gains inside a variable annuity. You have to pay tax when you pull it out, but as long as you're just letting it ride and letting it grow, there is no tax. So you have choice, you have flexibility, you have tax deferral, and today what we want to talk about is you also have some guarantees. You can attach income riders onto these to kind of give you that guarantee that even if the market falls, you'll always be able to get out whatever you put in, plus possibly step-ups in a lot of the contracts, as long as you take it as a stream of income. Now, kind of just talking to you guys, we all know that there's no such thing as a perfect investment. And so if you were to kind of take a step back and think about what are the drawbacks to a variable annuity, it always comes back to one thing, and that is the fees. Yeah, there are a lot of guarantees in these contracts, but there's also a big cost. I mean, you're going to have a management fee, and typically that's going to be about 1%. That's for the management of the mutual funds or the sub-accounts inside the contract. You also have an insurance expense, and an average insurance expense would be 1.4%. And then there's the cost of the rider, of the income benefit, and that's typically about 1%. So at the end of the day, we're looking at about 3.4% total cost, and maybe more if the insurance expense is a little higher, or the management fees are higher, or they have more than one rider. So at a minimum, we're probably looking at somewhere between 3 and 4%, right around that 3.4, 3.5% total cost. And guys, that's expensive. I mean, that's really expensive. I mean, if you look at the things that people like Bill Gross and Jeremy Grantham are saying about the market averaging about 5 to 7% growth over the next 10 years, I mean, even if we took the high-end estimate of 7%, if we subtract 3.4% from that, we're only making 3.5, 3.6% per year. And that's not great. I mean, that's a lot. That's very, very, very expensive. And so what we want people to tell us ultimately is we know what the management fee is for. I mean, we know we're paying managers with track records and experience to manage those mutual fund type accounts inside this contract, and we wouldn't even want them to do it for free, so we're okay with that. We know what it's for. We know what the rider's for too. I mean, that's pretty much the reason that we bought it, so we know what that's for. But what's that insurance expense for? See, that's the foundation of any variable annuity conversation that you have with a client. It will always begin and kind of center around that insurance expense, because really when we ask that question, what's that for? I mean, what is it for? It's for life insurance. If you look out at the website and you kind of listen to the audio or look at the script or the outline for a discussion of variable annuities, we always start it with a conversation about life insurance, and they always tell us they don't need it. They don't want it. So that insurance expense is for something that they've already told us they don't want and they don't need. And I think at the end of this call, I would encourage everybody to kind of go back to the website and really dig into that conversation and that script that we kind of look at and talk about or really zero in on when we talk about the insurance expense, which is how we start every conversation about a variable annuity. And what I kind of want you to make sure that you get from today is that's kind of going to be the center of the conversation. Even when we talk about the riders, we're always going to kind of reference that and kind of circle back to that. So that insurance expense is life insurance. And again, at the end of the day, it's life insurance that has kind of three drawbacks, aside from the fact that they didn't even want it or need it. First, it's expensive. It's really expensive insurance. Second, it's taxable. And regular life insurance is tax-free, but this life insurance is taxable. And third, and we're going to dig a little bit deeper into that, there's usually no payoff. It's life insurance that you probably never ever have an opportunity to collect. So it's expensive, it's taxable, there isn't ever any payoff, and it's something that you didn't even want or need. Because as the account value, the reason that you don't typically get to use the life insurance inside that contract is if the account value goes up, because the insurance expense is a percentage of the account value, the fee is going to go up. But even as the fee goes up, because the account value is going up, and the insurance company is ever only guaranteeing you the difference between what you put in and what you have in your account value, you only ever get the higher of those two values. If your account value is going up, the benefit, or the insurance expense benefit, the death benefit, is going down. And ultimately, if we get to the point that we all as investors want to get to, a place where our account value is doing really, really well, you end up sending higher and higher in premiums to the insurance company every year for less and less, and ultimately zero death benefit. And if you ask people, how much should you have to pay an insurance company for zero benefit, what do they always say? Well, we shouldn't have to pay anything for zero benefit. And yet we always ask, do you think they waive that insurance expense? And we all know the answer to that. No, they don't. And that allows us to have the conversation that we really want to have, which is, did he go over that with you? Would it have mattered? Why do you suppose he didn't go over that with you or didn't explain any of that? And they always say, well, because had I known about it, I wouldn't have wanted it. I wouldn't have bought it. And if I hadn't bought it, well, then he wouldn't have made the money, which is ultimately what he's more interested in. He's more interested in making money for himself than he is in helping me. And so, guys, that's baseline. That's the foundation of every conversation that we have about a variable annuity. And you have to be good at laying that foundation, because it's true of every variable annuity that you'll ever see. So with different contracts, we can see different riders and we can see different benefits, and they'll all have their little spin and their variation on things. But at the heart, the insurance expense is always going to be built into every variable annuity contract you ever run into, and so we need to know that that's the baseline and that's the foundation. And ultimately, that insurance expense and that conversation will be the reference point that we're always going to circle back to when we start talking about the riders. Because the riders that you might see on a variable annuity really come in two varieties. It's all really about income, and that's what people are really buying them for, is the income protection. And so of the two varieties, the first is really a dinosaur. It's called a Guaranteed Minimum Income Benefit, a GMIB. And you're not even going to see those anymore. Now back in the day, that was the only income rider or the only benefit that was available. It was the one and only. And what they would do is they would guarantee a growth rate. And back in the day that these were popular, a typical growth rate was 6%. So what the salesperson would say is, well, how would you like 6% or the market, whichever is better? So if the market does great and the market does better than 6%, if it does 8, 9, or 10, well then we'll credit your account the 8, 9, or 10 that the market did. But if the market ever did worse than 6%, well, we'd always at least credit your account the 6% growth. And that was awesome. I mean, the one drawback was that you couldn't take the benefit lump sum. You could only cash that guarantee in the form of income. But at the end of the day, wasn't, even though you couldn't take it out lump sum and you could only cash it in as income, really wasn't a big deal. I mean, people, quite frankly, didn't have a problem with that, because when you think about it, if your account's doing really, really well and it's way, way up because the market's doing so well, well, then you don't need that income guarantee. But if your account falls and you're down, you're upside down, well, if all you can do is, if the insurance company is willing to cover your losses, as long as you take it in the form of income, you're probably okay with that restriction. You're probably thinking, yeah, well, as long as they're going to do that, I'm okay with taking it as income. So people really weren't quite disturbed or upset that you couldn't take it lump sum. That wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that you kind of had to annuitize the contract for a minimum of a 10-year period certain to access that guarantee. Now you could take it for longer. You could draw that income for a longer than 10-year period of time, but you at least had to give the insurance company 10 years to pay it back to you. And so what that ultimately meant when you annuitized the contract is that you turned over all your money to the insurance company, and they had complete control in exchange for an allowance. So when you turned over all your money to the insurance company and they had all the money in their account, how much was left in your account? Well, nothing. And when you had control, when all the money was in your account, it was a 6% interest rate. But when they had control, when it was all in their account, what do you suppose happened to the interest rate? Well, it went down. And back then, when you annuitize a contract, it reverts back to the annuity rate, whatever the current annuity rate is when you annuitize the contract. Back in the day, when you would see something like that, the annuity rate would have been about 1.5%. Now today, we know you're not going to find anything with 1.5%, but back then, 1.5% would have been common. So in a disclosure meeting, what you would tell people is the guarantee is 6% for 7 years, the 7 years of the contract. So at the very least, no matter what, you're guaranteed that 6% times 7 years or 42%. And that's at a minimum. So that's not bad. I mean, that's great. I just didn't realize you were willing to turn over your life savings in exchange for an allowance. Because if you're willing to do that, there are a lot of things that we can look at. And people would always say, well, what do you mean, turn over all my money in exchange for an allowance? Yeah, you have to actually annuitize this contract. That means the insurance company has all the money in their account. And when they move all the money into their account, how much is left in your account? None. And when you have all the money in your account, it's a 6% guarantee. But once they have all the money in their account, what do you think happens to that guarantee, that interest rate? I mean, here's the other thing to consider. If you have to take it out over a minimum of 10 years, Is it really a 7-year contract or a 17-year contract? That 7 that you're in it plus the 10 years to get it out. Well, it's really a 17-year contract. Right. And during the 10 years that they have control over the account and they can do whatever they want to the interest rate, you get paid 1.5%. So you get 6% for the first 7 years, which is 42%, but it's 1.5% per year for the next 10 years, which is how much? That's 15%. So you make a total of 57%, but over a 17-year period of time. And when they got out the calculator and they realized that 57% over 17 years ends up being 3.35%, were they excited anymore? No, they weren't excited. I mean, even today, 3.35%, guys, that's not exciting. That was especially true in the environment that these were being sold. Now, here's the thing. These things aren't sold anymore. Remember, I said they're a dinosaur. And they're not sold anymore because two things happened. One, consumers got wise to the fact that they had to annuitize the contract, that they had to give up control over their accounts. And when they kind of got wise to that, they weren't excited. So when they first came out, you could sell a ton of this stuff. But as people started to realize that annuitization was required and annuitization became kind of a dirty word, it was really, really hard to make a case for that. That was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened, though, was interest rates tanked. Over the years, interest rates went down and they stayed down, and the company really couldn't reinvest the money that they received in a way that they could guarantee 6% growth anymore. So those went away. But some smart people at the insurance companies, the actuaries, actually came up with a better idea. What they came up with and what you'll see these days is something called a GWB, or a guaranteed withdrawal benefit. And the great thing about that is you don't have to annuitize the contract. So that's good for the buyer. That's great for the consumer. And the other great thing is the insurance company doesn't have to guarantee a growth rate, and that's what makes it appealing to them. So from the insurance company's perspective, this is win-win. This is good for everybody. We don't have to guarantee a growth rate anymore, and you don't have to worry about annuitizing the contract. So this is good for everybody. What we will do is we'll guarantee the account from loss by allowing you to take a stream of income until you get everything that you put into it back, plus, in most contracts, step-ups, some growth. Now again, like any of the, like its ancestor, its predecessor, you can't take the money lump sum if you're gonna if we're going to guarantee that you get everything back plus step-ups. You can't take that lump sum. But at least you'll always be able to get everything you put in plus step-ups as long as you take the money as a guaranteed stream of income. So now the question becomes, is there anything wrong with that? Well, I think if we're being honest, maybe not. I mean, yeah, if you activate the contract, you're giving up some control. You can't take out everything that maybe you wanted. You can't get it lump sum, so you're giving up some control. But in exchange for the insurance company covering the losses, maybe that's okay. So what I want you guys to understand is you're probably not going to win when you're sitting across from a client if you argue that, well, they're limiting your withdrawals. Or if you take out even $1 more than what they tell you can take out, they're going to recalculate and reset the guarantee, and so for all practical purposes, the guarantee is kind of in some ways voided. It's really not the guarantee they promised. Well, again, people aren't that worried about the guarantee. They're not even thinking about it when their account value is up. But when their account value is down, what they start to think is, well, okay, so I gave up some guarantee, and I have to kind of live within their guidelines and not take out more than they said, but I just won't do that. I mean, I'm okay with it. So is there anything ultimately wrong? Well, yeah, there is something wrong. It turns out that that GWB, or that withdrawal benefit, actually ends up voiding the death benefit. And guys, that's why you have to be good at being able to discuss that death benefit or that insurance expense, because again, that's the foundation that we're always going to circle back to, and that's the real drawback and the real problem with these guaranteed withdrawal benefits, the fact that they void that insurance expense or that death benefit. And here's why that happens and how you can leverage it. Because ultimately what we want them to say is, hey, maybe I'm not working with the right guy. That's the holy grail of the disclosure meeting. And any conversation we have is just an excuse to ask, why didn't he go over this with you? So let's just take a step back and look at why activating that guaranteed withdrawal benefit rider voids the death benefit. See, a long time ago, back in the late 90s, 2000, withdrawals from variable annuity contracts were dollar for dollar. So what that meant is if you had $100,000 in your account and you withdrew $10,000, your death benefit was your account value minus any withdrawals. So you still had a $90,000 death benefit, $100,000 minus the $10,000 that you withdrew. Your withdrawals affected the death benefit dollar for dollar. But early on, in 2001, the insurance companies realized, hey, that's a problem. Because here's what happened in 2001. In 2001, you might have started with $100,000 in your contract, but because of the market falling and tanking, you might only end up with $50,000. And so what people would do is they would go ahead and activate those guarantees. They would take out, say, $5,000 per year for 10 years. Now remember, there was only $50,000 left in that contract, and if they took out the allotted $5,000 per year for 10 years, how much did they take out? Well, they took out the whole $50,000, and yet if you died, the insurance company was still on the hook for the other 50 grand. And remember, you completely wiped out that contract. You spent it down to zero, so the insurance company has no money in its coffer to recover any of that. They were taking it in the shorts. And so what they said is, well, we're not going to do that anymore. They changed all the withdrawals from dollar to dollar, dollar for dollar, to pro rata. And every contract you run across today will be pro rata. And so here's what that means. That means that, let's say you have $100,000, and again the market falls and you're left with $50,000. Well, if you take out $5,000 per year and you do that for 9 years, you've taken out 5,000 times 9, $45,000. And that's 90% of the $50,000 in your account value. And so what they do is they reduce the death benefit proportionally. See, what you would think is, if you had a $100,000 death benefit and you withdrew $45,000 from the account, that the insurance company would still owe you $55,000, the difference between the $100,000 and the $45,000 that you withdrew. But that's not how it works. See, you only get $10,000 if you die at that point. And that's because you withdrew 90% of the money. And so they lower your death benefit by 90%. They still owe you the 10%, so 10% of $100,000 is $10,000, but that's a far cry from the $55,000 they were on the hook for when they had dollar for dollar withdrawals. And think about this. If you live another year and you withdraw the whole $50,000, they don't even owe you anything as a death benefit. But here's the question. Do you think they stopped charging you the insurance expense? They don't. You still pay for it. You pay for 2 guarantees, the withdrawal benefit and the insurance expense, the death benefit, even though the company knows that you won't ever be able to cash in on both. And the question is there anything wrong with that? Yeah, There's a lot wrong with that. It's not that the numbers don't work. It's the idea that they're going to charge you for something that you're never, ever going to be able to get. So what happens these days is you take out your $100,000. Well, we just went over that example. Yeah, there's a lot wrong with that. You'll never, ever, ever get to use the death benefit. See, think of it this way. You're never going to get to use it if your account goes up. Because remember, you only get the higher of your account value or what you put into it plus step-ups, whichever is higher. So if the market's up and your account value's up, there is no death benefit. Remember, we talked about that. We started this whole conversation saying you would end up paying an insurance expense or a death benefit cost, premiums to the insurance company for zero insurance. So if the market's up, you'll never get to cash in on the death benefit. But here's the real problem now. When the market's down, you'll still never get to cash in on the death benefit. And that's because when you start taking those withdrawals to make sure that you get all your money back plus the step-ups, you're actually voiding the death benefit. But they never stop charging you. See, they charge you for 2 guarantees knowing full well that you'll never be able to cash in on both. So if you talk about that rider, that GWB rider with a client, what you might say is, you know, the nice thing about the contract is you have that rider that guarantees you against loss. So if you ever lost money in this account, you could still get it all back, including the step-ups, not lump sum, but you'll always get it back in the form of income. Now, the rider that makes this possible isn't free, but we're willing to pay for it because why? Well, because we want the protection in case anything were to happen. If the market were to fall, we want to know that we can at least get all of our money back, everything that we put into it. Right. And as long as you get what you pay for, you're okay, right? Yeah. I mean, how do we feel if we don't get what we pay for? Yeah, well then we're upset. Right, because really when you think about it, that's the knock on insurance companies, that you buy homeowners insurance and when your house burns down, they don't want to pay you. Or that you get in a car accident and you submit the claim and the insurance company argues about whether or not they're going to fix it, right? I mean, that's the whole knock. So if we don't get what we pay for, well then we're upset. And why? Well, because they didn't, you know, they didn't make good on their promise. Right. So here's the thing. We wouldn't restrict our access to our own money if we didn't have to, would we? No, we wouldn't want to do that. And if our accounts are up, we don't have to restrict access to our money. We can get it lump sum, we can take it as a form of income, we can let it ride, we can do whatever we want. It's only if our accounts are down that we might ask them to make good on the guarantee that we paid for, right? Right. But here's the thing you need to know. Activating that rider will void the death benefit. And here's what I mean by that. Let's say you have $100,000 and it falls to $50,000. Okay, so if you withdraw $5,000 from $50,000, you've withdrawn what percentage? Well, we've withdrawn 10%. Right, and if you took $5,000 for 10 years, how much would you have taken out at the end of that 10 years? Well, we would have taken out $50,000. So how much death benefit should be left? You had $100,000, you withdrew $50,000. How much death benefit should be left? Well, $50,000 should be left. Right. But they actually lower the death benefit proportionally. And because you withdrew 100% of the $50,000 that was in the account, 100% of your death benefit is gone. So how much should they charge for the death benefit or for life insurance at that point when there's no more life insurance to be had? Well, they shouldn't charge anything. Right. But do you think they waive the fee? Well, I would think they would. Yeah, you would think they would, but they don't. And so I guess my question is, did he explain that to you? Would it have made a difference? Why do you suppose that wasn't explained? See how I'm bringing it back to that insurance expense? And this is the second time, because they told you the first time when you went over the insurance expense initially that he never went over that with me. He withheld that information. Now they're telling you for a second time, that's another thing he didn't go over with me. He withheld that information. And why? Because he was looking at for himself. He wanted to make the sale. He wanted to make more money. He knew that if he went over that we wouldn't want that. See, it's at that point that they start questioning, are we working with the right guy? And guys, that's your opportunity to step in. Because what they're wondering is, if we're not working with the right guy, who can we work with instead? And remember, everything that we do in that disclosure meeting is to get to that point. Every conversation leads to that place where we ask, why didn't he go over this with you? Now here's the thing that I kind of want to just step back for a second and talk to you guys about. I mean, you guys all realize, because you're in the industry, that you can get this very same benefit. You can get this very same income guarantee, this very same rider, on the fixed side. Because the annuities on the fixed side these days have the exact same income riders. So what's the difference? Why don't the fixed annuities have the same problems avoiding this death benefit that the variable annuities do? Well, the reason you don't have that problem is because, for one, on the fixed side, you aren't invested in the market, so they don't have to insure against loss. So what that means is there are no management fees. We're not paying any managers to manage any sub-accounts. We're not invested in the market. Because you can't lose money, there is no insurance expense. There's still the rider cost. A lot of times it's going to be a lot cheaper. The rider is going to be cheaper even than the rider on the variable side. But look what's happened right off the bat. You've already stripped out the 1% management fee. You've stripped out the 1.4% insurance expense. So at the very least, even if the rider cost were the same, you can get that same guarantee for 2.4% less.
And Jeff, can I jump in there a second?
Sure.
A lot of guys get confused, and they think that when they look at the Morningstar, that the insurance expense is, or at least includes, the rider. So that insurance expense is just the life insurance, isn't it?
Right. That's just the life insurance. And when you think about it, there's no way that it would be included in a Morningstar report, and here's why. The rider is optional. And so Morningstar would have no idea whether you had that or not. And so they're not going to include it in the report because they don't even know if you're going to choose that. And every company has a different rider and a different cost. Now, because it's optional, they're only going to include in the report the things that are the same in every contract, regardless of the rider. So that insurance expense is in every contract. And remember, when we started this conversation, we said that insurance expense conversation had to be, was baseline, regardless of the riders, because the riders can change. Clients can mix and match riders. The riders will be a little bit different between one company and the next, but what will always be the same, what they will always have in common, what all variable annuities have in common, is the fact that you're invested in sub-accounts and you're paying an insurance expense. But with on the fixed side, you can get the same rider, and it might cost the same, but there's no insurance expense and there's no management fee. So really, quite frankly, guys, it ends up being kind of easy. Because if what the client wants is growth, then what they should do is go ahead and buy those funds outside of the annuity. Because then they avoid the insurance expense altogether. They get more growth because they have less cost. They don't have that insurance expense dragging them down. And really, when you think about it, we just talked about the fact that they're never going to get to use the insurance expense anyway. They're never going to get to use the death benefit because if the account goes up, there is no death benefit. And if the account goes down, the minute they make withdrawals, the death benefit is voided. So if what you want is growth, Why not just put it in the market without that an insurance expense dragging you down, especially, again, like we said, you can't use it anyway. And if what you want is income, well, why not get the income cheaper on the fixed side, on the fixed chassis, without the management fees and without the insurance expense? And if what you want is both, then why not just put your growth money directly in the market without that extra expense and put your income money into something that's going to give you the same income, only cheaper? And what we wonder is, did he explain that you could get either one of those benefits without that additional expense? Did he give you both options? And if not, why not? Now again, stepping back for a second, we've talked about this in the past. We've even shown you articles where the insurance companies are running away from these guarantees because of the extended low interest rate environment that we've been in. They don't even have the money in this interest rate environment. They can't even reinvest it in a way that gives them any confidence that they'll be able to honor these guarantees. And if the insurance companies don't have confidence in these guarantees, how much confidence should we or our clients put in them? See, if you end up meeting with people and they end up telling you, we hate the insurance expense. We didn't know that was there. We don't want that. That's awful. It's expensive. It's taxable. We're not going to get any payoff. Well, then it's a natural segue in a solutions meeting to explain that, well, don't worry about it. These products, these guarantees come in two flavors. These strategies can be had on the variable side or the fixed side. On the variable side, there's a management fee and there's an insurance expense. On the fixed side, there's no management fee and no insurance expense. So there's still the rider cost. And that still might be 1%. But on $100,000, you'd only be paying $1,000 for that benefit as opposed to $3,400 for that benefit. And I'm just wondering, do you remember him ever going over the fixed option? Now, obviously, you know, we don't want, if we start having this conversation, we don't necessarily want to be dragged into a whole thing about numbers. Again, all we're wondering is, did he give you all the options? And if he didn't, why wouldn't he have? Well, because he wanted to make more money. He was looking out for himself more than he was looking out for me. And that is ultimately where we want to bring the conversation and end the conversation on that note. So when you look at these contracts, a lot of times when I talk to guys, they're a little bit worried that, wow, how am I going to get over these contracts? Because with these income riders, these guys, they're never going to want to move out of something like this. And the thing I want you guys to understand is these riders are nothing to be afraid of. In fact, like we just looked at, you have a better solution. You have the exact same thing on a cheaper chassis. And so what you want to do is get good at talking about the insurance expense so that when you talk about these riders, we can always bring it back to they're charging you for something that you're not going to ever be able to use. And they know that. Was that
Can I get in there a second, Jeff?
Sure, go ahead.
I love what you just said is nothing to be afraid of. So our job at the disclosure meeting, should we assume, Jeff, that these people should be upset by this or love this? Or do we make no assumptions whatsoever?
We make no assumptions whatsoever.
So show it to them, guys. Show it to them the way that Jeff showed you here, and let them make their own decision. And it's not about, as we've talked about before, when it comes to fees, I've had people leave their advisor for a $500 fee. I mean, if somebody with $1 million account and leave their advisor a $500 fee. Why, Jeff, would somebody with $1 million account leave somebody for a $500 fee? Because does that really make, I mean, how big a deal is a $500 fee to somebody with $1 million?
No, it's not a big deal at all.
So why'd they leave?
So they're not going to leave for the fee. They'll leave. And especially what you'll find is people with money put even more stock in trust. I don't trust my guy. Why don't you trust your guy? Well, because he didn't tell me everything I needed to know to make a good decision. Like what? Like how that there was life insurance in this and how it worked. He didn't tell me that it was taxable. He didn't tell me that I wouldn't get to use it. He didn't tell me that this other writer that he sold me would void it. He didn't tell me any of that. And see, if you don't like the fee, what's the solution? Well, get a different investment or complain to your advisor and get him to lower the fee. But what's the solution for I don't trust my guy? Get a new guy.
So don't make an assumption, guys, about whether they're in. So, and even if you don't even plan on changing the variable annuity, it's still something you want to go through. So just as Jeff pointed out, so they decide this guy is not to be trusted. So just because you go through this conversation doesn't mean that you mean to change their variable annuity. I mean, you could, or you can't. They're going to ask to. But just by going through this conversation is one more nail in the coffin of the advisor, that he's not disclosing the whole story to these people. So don't ever assume, oh, you know what, this investment is so great, I better not go over this stuff. Oh, a REIT, because of the surrender charge of the REIT, they're never going to be able to get out of this, so I shouldn't go through it. No, our job is to let them know why a guy did this.
Yeah, it's all about disclosure. And like I said, you know, I get calls from guys all the time saying, well, they didn't buy the annuity, they bought it because of the income guarantee. Well, duh. That's why everybody's buying them. That's the only reason they're still being sold. So yeah, but that, again, it's nothing to be afraid of. It's a great thing, actually. It's a great way to circle back to disclosure. And that's ultimately what we have to bring everything back to, which is disclosure. So,
Say, Jeff, I've got a question that came in.
Sure.
Is it possible that a VA owner can keep the living benefit and reduce the expenses by opting out of the other benefits?
Yeah, it is possible. It's called moving to the fixed chassis. If you don't like the insurance expense and you don't like the management fees, yeah. Yeah, change your investment. They have the exact same thing on the other side, a lot cheaper without those things that you're talking about. But no, you're right. You can't call the carrier and say, I don't want the management fees and I don't want the insurance expense anymore.
So all VAs have the management fees and all VAs have that life insurance expense, but not all VAs have the income benefit or the guaranteed withdrawal benefit expense.
Right.
But you can't get one without, you can't say I don't want the life insurance benefit.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a variable annuity without the life insurance benefit. All right. With that, that's all I've got.
That was awesome, Jeff. And we're going to post this under the, as well on the replays portion of the website, and then also we're going to post it under the variable annuity, the fee section of the disclosure meeting where the life insurance discussion already is. And we'll post this coaching call under there with the title, what was the title, Missy?
It's going to say VA benefits or VA living benefits are great, but they have unexpected drawbacks.
So that if you need to review the Jeff's great call here, that you'll be able to do that on a regular basis. So thank you, Jeff. That was extremely helpful. We're getting a lot of positive responses on that. So excellent. Thanks, guys. Well, no further questions, and we'll cut you loose and have a great week, and we'll talk to you all on Friday. Thanks, everybody.